used to be very thin, and my body fat was really low, so I can see like everything in my body. So I'd seen this little pea-sized thing in my breast, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I went to the doctor, had it checked out. They're like, oh, it's nothing. It's just, you know, extra tissues. Don't worry about it. You can get a lumpectomy whenever you want. I'm like, okay, fine. Didn't think about it again. My girlfriend comes in town, and she came to the gym with me. I was changing clothes. She was like, girl, you need to go to the doctor. I'm like, I already did. And she was like, no, you need to go to the doctor. I'm like, okay, I'll go. So I ended up going, and she said same thing, and I'm like, okay, well, all right, fine. So I pushed it off again, and I ended up, and I noticed it had gotten bigger. I'm like, it was almost like the size of my boob. My boob's really, really small. So I'm like, oh, dang. So I called the doctor that she had referred me to, who went out of business. I don't know how doctors go out of business, but whatever. He went out of business, so I ended up going to my PCP, because me and my PCP are really close, my primary care physician. And I'm like, hey, I need you to refer me to a doctor so I can get this lump out my boob. And he's like, what are you talking about? I just seen you in January. This was in June. I had just seen him in January for my annual. And he's like, well, I just seen you in June. Come in and see me. I'm like, okay, fine. So I go in, and he checks me out really fast, and he's like, yeah, I need you to go get a mammogram. I'm like, I already had a mammogram. It came back negative. I don't need another mammogram. I need this out. I need this lump on my boob. He was like, I'll be right back. So he left and came back, and he's like, you're not leaving my office until I get you set up to get a mammogram and a biopsy. I'm like, it's not even that serious. And he's like, no, I just want to make sure. I'm like, okay, fine. So I go and get a biopsy and another mammogram. Mammogram came back negative again. I got the biopsy came back positive, and I got a phone call. It was in my office, got a phone call. She's like, hey, this is Dr. Brown. I was just calling to let you know I got your test results back. And she's talking just like this, and I'm like, oh, wonderful. And she's like, yeah, you have breast cancer. So I just want to call and let you. I'm like, what? And she sounded so chipper, and I'm like, could you say that again? And she's like, oh, you tested positive for breast cancer. It looks like you have the tumor that's in your breast is cancerous. I freaked out, just crying my little eyes out. Went to see my best friend who happened to work with me. I went round to his office, and we talked about it. And then I'm like, okay, this is God's way of telling me I get new boobs. I've wanted new boobs my entire life because I've never had any. Okay, this is my way to get boobs. I don't have to pay for it. So I'm like, okay, cool. I ended up going through the whole process. They had my surgery scheduled. My sister, who actually works in the medical field, she was like, something's not right. I'm like, what? I'm going to get the surgery. They're going to do, I decided to do a double mastectomy, because I didn't want anything coming back. If, 5 years down the line is what they say, after 5 years it can come back. So I scheduled a double, and she ended up referring to me one of her physicians out at Emory. And I went out to Emory seeing another oncologist, and she was like, hey, because I actually decided not to get chemo, because they gave me options. I don't want chemo. It's poison in your body. I don't want it. No chemo for me, is what I said. So I went to see the doctor that my sister referred me to. I love her to pieces. Dr. Khan is her name. And so I was there for 4 hours. I had, you put your gown on. I'm like, oh no, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. No, just wait. The doctor's coming. Okay, fine. So I go back in. And so we discussed my medical records that she had gotten from the other hospital. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she was like, so you decided to get chemo? I'm like, I sure did. She's like, well, why'd you do that? I'm like, well, because it's just poison in your body, and I don't want to do that. I don't like drugs in my body. She's like, oh, yeah, you're right. You do have a few options. She said, you can do chemo, and, it is taxing on your body. You'll probably lose your hair. Skin will change colors. You'll be tired. I'm like, okay. She's like, or you could die. Excuse me? What? I could die? She was like, yeah, because the type of cancer you had, she said you have stage 4 cancer. The type of cancer you have is, especially at your age, it spreads very rapidly. So if you don't get chemo, it's going to spread through your other organs, and you'll probably be dead in less than a year. Sign me up for some chemo! And she was like, there's no way with this type of cancer that you should be going to surgery. She said, because they'll open you up and it can potentially spread. I started chemo a week later, and I absolutely loved the chemo. I know I'm like weird. It's super tedious. You're there for like 8 hours. It's like a job, but you do nothing and you just sit there. And the first half of chemo, I usually worked because I brought my work laptop, so that was cool. The second half, I got really, really tired. But even with chemo, because they gave you a steroid afterwards, so you're not like drowsy, I still, every day before my chemo, And after my chemo, I rode my Peloton bike every single day. I did chemo. I did 8 rounds of chemo, and they said I'm all good. I was like, yay me! And then a month passed, and it was time for me to get boobs. Yay me again! And then another month passed, and it's like, oh, it looks like there's some cancer in your lymph nodes. I'm like, what does that mean? So they said I had to do chemo. I'm like, well, how long do I have to do chemo and what's it entail? I had to do chemo every single day. I had to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it usually only took about 20 to 30 minutes, but it, like, when I tell you it burnt my skin, it burnt because they targeted right where they found the issue, so it was black, like you got a black shirt, it's black like your shirt, but it made my entire skin dark. Like my gums were black, my tongue was black, my hands were black, my feet were black. It was the freakiest thing ever. And it stayed black. My fingernails got black. It was wild. It was weird, but I loved it. I mean, I didn't have any hair. I was totally bald because of the chemo. And I absolutely loved it. I got to a point though, it was one point where I pray a lot because I'm a believer. But there was one point in the chemo, this is throughout my entire cancer, there was one point where I said, enough is enough. I don't want to do this anymore, because during the radiation treatments, they got too close to my throat, and I couldn't eat. I couldn't eat anything for 1 week because I couldn't swallow, because it was burning, and I didn't know it. They didn't know it because they're trying to target as much as they can. But radiation obviously goes through your whole body, else my body wouldn't have turned black. I mean black, but much blacker. And I'm like, I don't want to do it anymore. And I told the doctor, I'm done. I'm not doing any more treatment. You only have about 15 more days. I'm like, I can't go without eating for 15 days. So she ended up giving me this stuff called magic mouthwash, and it worked amazing. It took about 2 days, and I was able to eat again. And I'm like, it just calmed everything that was burning inside, and I was able to eat again. So it was absolutely amazing. Again, I had another augmentation to get my breast right, because this one shriveled up because of the radiation, so I looked crazy. Now with just one boob, and I'm like, it looks very funny. I mean, but I don't care. But I feel like on my right side, I just feel so free because there's no obstacle in the way. And on the left side, it's like, I like the profile of it, but I'm like, do I really need a boob there? So for me, I go back and forth. So I really think, like you had stated earlier, everybody's different. Some people is like, oh, I gotta have a boob now. Or some people are like, nope, I don't want a boob. Or some people are, is it saline? Is it silicone? I don't really think it matters, honestly. Probably I'll do maybe one more surgery, maybe not. But other than that, I think, for me at least, I absolutely enjoyed the journey. It's truly a lesson learned. Women, just make sure you check yourself and don't always listen to your doctors, even though the doctors are supposed to be there to protect you and guide you in the right way. Not all doctors are the same, so do your research on your doctors. Please, again, do your exams, and if you know yourself well, that's great, but still do your exams and get your mammogram. So that's my story.